So athletics is embroiled in one of the most notorious scandals that we've seen to date, specifically with Russia being involved at the forefront of doping accusations. So this is trickled over to football a little bit with Arsene Wenger coming out in a recent interview on L'Equipe. I believe I said that right and pretty good. I'll give myself a pat on the back for that. He came out in an article there and said that he has experienced this before, but none of his players or the clubs that he'd been in charge with have ever been involved in this. So let's look at a couple of quotes that Arsene had to say. So he was asked the question, how prominent is doping in football? Arsene Wenger said, in 30 years as a coach, I have never had my players injected so that they might perform better. I'm proud of that. I've played against a lot of teams who were not in the same frame of mind. So tickets thrown out, bold statements there. Arsene, no worries about it. And one of the most notorious examples there that he stated is that in September, only recently, they lost 2-1 to Dynamo Zagreb with a Dynamo midfielder, Arijan Ademi, who played the full 90 minutes, failing a drugs test after the game. And Arsene quoted, when I saw that the players of Zagreb were doped, well, when you don't play at your best and your opponent is doped, it is difficult, he has said. So we have brought in Adrian from outside90.com to talk about this. Now, I have had a lot of discussions with this with my fellow co-workers in here who, of course, we're in the United States. This is an issue that is consistently brought up each year with American football athletes, some cases in the NBA, but more so in the NFL, because clearly, I mean, some of those guys are just freak athletes, and a lot of the questions are around how much performance-enhancing drugs are they using. MMA as well, UFC, is not shy to this controversy neither. So I was asked the question here, how prominent is this in world football? And this maybe is going to bring up more cases than I have known. Like, it's never been something that I've considered to be at the forefront of a problem in football. I don't know if you agree or disagree. We remember some of the notorious cases with Rio Ferdinand failing a drugs test and the whole scandal that was surrounding that. But Arsene Wenger coming out and saying that he has known many teams that have used this is somewhat surprising to me. What was your initial thought to this?
Well, Arsene Wenger actually came out 2 years ago and he said that the game's full of legends who are in fact cheats, and that was his direct quote. So I get the feeling that that statement was thrown under the rug 2 years ago, and there wasn't really much dialogue to come out of that. Which I actually don't find surprising. I think the commercialism of the game now, there are a lot of different parties. There's a lot of politics involved where people don't want to bring this to the surface because the last thing that they want is an iconic figure or someone within the game who has a big profile that could potentially get done for doping. So it's a very convoluted problem. There's a lot to it, but I think we'd have to be incredibly naive to think that there isn't a lot of cheating and doping going on in world football. I think if you look across the board with certain sports, obviously cycling's one that comes to mind. There has to be cheating and doping, and unfortunately, and almost depressingly, that's the sheer fact of what it's become, what modern sport is. I think if you look at rugby, for example, I know that it's well documented there that there are a lot of young juniors coming through that have been done for doping in the UK just to get themselves to the right physical peak. And to think that there aren't players out there that are using performance-enhancing drugs in football would be incredibly ignorant. I think the thing that has to happen from here is Wenger's come out with this statement. We need to take it seriously. 2 years ago, like I mentioned, it was swept under the carpet. Nothing came of it. And I think with the implications of these Russian athletes being done for doping, I think we're going to see a lot more dialogue. I think we're going to see some whistleblowers come out of this. I think you'll see some more investigative journalists trying to dig up the facts, trying to rouse a discussion. I think the greatest thing that could come of it, and as football fans, you've got to remember, this is the game that I say we own, but without the football fans, it's absolutely nothing. This game wouldn't exist. We're the reason why these players get paid so well. We're the reason why it is so heavily commercialised. So I think as football fans, as consumers, we have a right to know. We deserve to know the facts. And I'd love to see Arsene Wenger have a conversation with the CEO of the EPL, Richard Scudamore, and begin this dialogue and look into how prevalent this issue actually really is.
Yeah, and you mentioned there a couple of years ago he's brought it up, and a former Arsenal player himself, Paul Merson, stated in 2011, who not shy of controversy himself, but I do like Paul Merson. He's a funny pundit. But he stated that there was times before games where he would go into a Holiday Inn and there would be a somewhat obscure package there, and he said a yellow liquid that he would just inject into his arms. He never asked any questions, and from the moment you trust a manager, you take everything he asks you. And then Arsenal, of course, said that this was just a multivitamin package. This was nothing, that it was illegal. Arsene Wenger even he denied those statements, saying that if you find a player that has ever injected himself under my watch, then you come out and tell me, because that would be a lie. Now, this is a statement that has many different layers to it. So, one, I've heard a lot of people talking, specifically since I came to the United States, saying, oh, well, soccer, you don't need so much performance-enhancing drugs. I mean, that's just an obnoxious statement. Like, it's not like just because we're not out there smashing into each other at 100 miles an hour with all those pads and are strong as NFL athletes doesn't mean that performance-enhancing drugs isn't going to be a form of cheating in this sport. Like, you see athletes, you see more defenders, I would say, than anything else in world football, growing to become just freak athletes. Like, you look at someone like Mangala from Manchester City, just a powerhouse defender, so athletic. Mika Richards, so big and strong. Zlatan Ibrahimovic, even just a overall figure who encompasses athleticism and talent. Ronaldo's probably the most prominent case, I would say, that people no doubt will question, how is Ronaldo in such great shape? How is he so talented? I mean, it's through just hard work and dedication, but of course there is ways around that. People will cheat. That is just the statistical figures there stated that the UEFA in the past did a massive test. I think they focused a lot more so on this before, and they found out that there was relatively high testosterone levels in some of the cases that they studied. So it's clear that if someone else is out there trying to better their opponent, there's a lot of people that won't want to go the long route and put in the hard work and the dedication, will look to try and find those shortcuts. And as you clearly mentioned there, with Russia at the forefront of this discussion right now, it would not surprise me if they were to come out and say, no, well, we might have did this, but go and look over there at Sweden or go and look over there at England. Those guys aren't free from excuses either, because there's a lot of people that are involved in this. Well, since I've came to the United States, the NFL, of course, with certain scandals involving drug use, is a lot more cases than it is in world football. That's just a known fact. But you do make a good point. Maybe so if Arsene Wenger continues to shout from the rooftops, people will take a closer look at this. So I guess the question is, how many times do you think it will take Arsene Wenger or someone like him to make a statement like this? Because he is a very well-respected figure, for people to kind of take more notice to this than they have done before.
I think it just comes back to the head honchos. It comes back to the CEO of the Premier League. It comes back to some of the big governing authorities, obviously FIFA, Uefa. Some of the problems that I have with doping in sport is the rules and regulations. All people ever want with any organisations and any regulations that are enforced is complete and utter transparency. The public consumption out there for some of these rules is basically non-existent. Like, I know I've dug up a few facts and I saw that UEFA, for some of their Europa League and Champions League games, apparently they test 2 players on site after every match.
It's clear that this isn't taken as serious as it is in other sports. Arsene Wenger had to basically voice his opinion previously about how they would only test for urine. They wouldn't actually do blood tests to give a thorough check to see if anyone has been using performance-enhancing drugs. His request for blood, until he requested it, it was never really looked upon. Then he did request it, and it was answered quickly by UEFA, who then announced its introduction to this cycle months later. And what they actually came out and said, and I will quote from UEFA, is that the Dynamo player who failed the drug test before, his transgression would not be punished. At least 2 players from a single team must test positive before sanctions are imposed. That is ridiculous, especially if you're finding someone who's clearly breaking the rules. The fact is that you have to have a majority example, but then, as you just mentioned, you're only testing 1 or 2 players. Therefore, you're never really going to get that large sample size that you need to punish people efficiently for breaking the rules. So the more so I look into it, the more it becomes such an obscure topic that has to be looked at with a closer magnifying glass, like you just stated. I mean, did you hear of that before? Like the fact that Dynamo would not face punishment because 2 players from their team had to be tested?
Yeah, I did. And the other thing about that Dynamo player is the fact that the game was, I think, almost, 4-6 weeks ago. Apparently he's going to be punished. I think it's on the 19th of November. I think the whole process itself as well, it's drawn out. It's almost going to take 2 months. Like, if a player tests positive, and I know people say about waiting about a B sample, a B sample is the same thing. A urine test, a B sample is a part of the whole test. They're saying, oh, I've got to wait for my secondary example. That's actually not the case. Like, if you test positive in the first case, the B sample, the chances are 99.9% you're going to test positive as well. So there's this lag time in this period where they say, oh, I'm waiting on the B sample, and that's the case with Uefa. But the fact that there's so much downtime before this player actually gets sanctioned means that this team, Dynamo Zagreb, who are in a group that's, it's tight. It's really closely contested, this group. And Arsenal, and I'm with Arsen Wenger on this one. What if this player were to be tested, he was positive, and they could get a turnaround within a week or two? And if they're going to really take this seriously, then I believe that perhaps the sanction should just be, if one player tests positive, then your team's kicked out of the Champions League. It'd make a lot more sense rather than having this long, drawn-out process, and also having this grey area where we actually don't know whether the team are going to be imposed with a sanction or it's purely just going to be the player, and then life goes on. So that's the real issue for me, and that's the crux of why there's just no transparency with this issue whatsoever.
Yeah, I completely agree. Great talking points there. So we'll look to continue this conversation, perhaps when more news comes out, especially with the Dynamo Zagreb case. We'll see what else has been talking about there. So thank you so much for joining us. And always, as I just mentioned there, make sure to check out outside90.com. And where can we find you on Twitter?
At outside90.
What about you? What about you? You don't want to do a shameless self promotion on here, because we do like to do that as well.
So what we've got running at the moment is, and I'm probably going to lose millions of Chelsea fans, but Outside 90 has a Chelsea relegation party happening at the moment. Wow. So just a bit of fun, because I must say I'm a Liverpool fan. I'm very much a neutral. I love a lot of different teams, but back when Roy Hodgson was managing Liverpool, they were poking fun at me because Liverpool were only 4 points above the drop zone. So just giving it back a little bit. So it's a bit of fun. We've got some lighthearted content on there, but we also hit the hardest issues from European football, UK, and then obviously down here in Australia. So yeah, jump on board and have a look.
All right, mate. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. So make sure to come back, TYT Sports, subscribe for plenty of more content like this. We'll follow up on this discussion with the more news that we find out. Thanks again.